Imagine your smartphone, right? It just suddenly loses connection to its primary super fast Wi-Fi network.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And to keep functioning, to keep your maps routing and your messages sending, it has to instantly figure out how to bounce signals off like three different highly unstable cellular towers simultaneously.
Just to stay online.
Yeah, seamlessly switching between them before the connection just drops entirely. That desperate, scrambling need to dynamically route around systemic failure, well, that is exactly where the United Kingdom finds itself right now. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's a great analogy for what we're looking at today.
Thanks. We have a custom-tailored analysis today for you, the learner. We are stepping onto the absolute leading edge of global events here. Today is Thursday, March 12th, 2026.
Right, fresh off the press.
Literally, the document sitting in front of us is a deeply comprehensive, heavily data-driven geostrategic report. It's titled Britain at the Crossroads, authored by Dr. Fried Noven.
And it is a dense read, but fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the mechanics of how a major world power actually navigates an era where, the old reliable alliances are fracturing.
Right.
Entirely new technologies are rewiring the financial system, and sudden global conflicts are quite literally rewriting the economic rules overnight.
But before we get into the weeds of how this structural scrambling actually works, we definitely have to acknowledge the elephant in the room regarding the source material.
Yeah, that's a very important point. We need that disclaimer up front.
Right. So Dr. Noven's report heavily factors in the very real, very sensitive military escalations that took place in late February 2026 in the Middle East, specifically involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Which is obviously dominating the news cycle right now.
Exactly. And it also directly models the fallout from the aggressive new trade policies coming out of the Trump administration. Now, we are not here to take a political stance on any of those foreign policies or domestic agendas.
Not at all.
Our mandate today is simply to look at the cold, hard math. We are impartially analyzing the economic shocks, the market reactions, and the strategic forecasts exactly as the author presents them.
So let's look at that math, because right out of the gate, the report presents this massive whiplash-inducing contradiction.
It really does.
The author notes that on January 19th, 2026, the International Monetary Fund actually upgraded the UK's economic forecast. They projected 1.3% growth, which technically made the UK the fastest-growing European G7 economy.
Yeah, and the Chancellor was touting this as a massive win at the time.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. How does a G7 golden child become a fragile basket case teetering on the edge just like 6 weeks later?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of an exogenous shock. I mean, you can build a pristine, beautiful economic model for domestic growth.
But reality gets in the way.
Yeah, it shatters the second it collides with messy geopolitical reality.
Yeah.
That IMF forecast from January was finalized before what the report categorizes as the 2026 Gulf crisis.
Right, late February.
It's exactly. On February 28th, when U.S. and Israeli military operations targeted Iranian nuclear infrastructure, the global supply chain just violently recalibrated.
They had to.
Right. By the time the UK's Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, released its March outlook, they had to instantly downgrade UK GDP growth to 1.1%.
Because energy markets don't care about your domestic tax models.
No, they really don't. The reaction was instantaneous. Wholesale gas prices spiked by an estimated 67%.
Wow.
And oil shot up by 35%. This creates an absolute mechanical nightmare for the Bank of England. It thrusts them into a stagflationary trap.
Which is stagnant economic growth colliding with high inflation.
Precisely.
Explain the trap here for us, because normally, if growth is slowing down, a central bank just cuts interest rates to make borrowing cheaper, right? Which stimulates businesses to invest and people to buy houses.
That's the standard playbook, yeah.
And right before this February crisis, the Bank of England was widely expected to cut the base rate down to 3.0%.
But they can't do that now without pouring gasoline on the fire.
Because of the oil prices.
Exactly. Because global oil and gas prices spiked, the UK is experiencing what economists call imported inflation. It costs more to heat a factory. It costs more to put diesel in delivery trucks.
And those costs are just passed directly to the consumer at the grocery store.
Always. If the Bank of England cuts rates to stimulate growth, they risk letting that imported inflation become permanently baked into the domestic economy. So they have to delay the rate cuts.
Meaning mortgages stay high?
Right. They have to keep borrowing expensive to cool demand, which actively chokes off that 1.3% growth the IMF was predicting just a few weeks ago.
Man, And while growth is being choked off, the public is getting squeezed from the exact opposite side by taxes.
Oh, the tax burden is historic right now.
Yeah, the report forecasts that the total tax burden in the UK, so that's income tax, VAT, corporate tax, is going to hit 38.5% of GDP by 2030 or 2031.
It's massive.
We are talking about the highest tax burden since the aftermath of the Second World War. And the mechanism driving a huge chunk of this is something called fiscal drag.
Fiscal drag is incredibly insidious
Why is that?
because it raises revenue without the government ever having to pass a new unpopular tax law. They don't have to vote to raise your taxes. The government simply freezes the income tax thresholds,
Okay, meaning what exactly?
like the specific salary numbers where you jump from paying a 20% tax rate to a 40% tax rate. The UK has frozen these thresholds until 2031.
Ah, I see. So if inflation is running high and a worker gets like a 5% pay raise just to try and keep up with the cost of groceries,
That raise might bump their nominal salary over that 40% threshold.
wow, they get dragged into a higher tax bracket.
Exactly. Their take-home pay actually buys fewer groceries than it did a year ago, but the government collects significantly more tax revenue.
That is brutal. For you listening, think about how wild that chain of events is. A military strike on nuclear infrastructure thousands of miles away spikes oil, which forces your central bank to keep your mortgage expensive, while domestic inflation silently drags you into a higher tax bracket.
It's a perfect storm.
Yeah.
And that lack of fiscal headroom, I mean, the government only has about 23.6 billion pounds of wiggle room, which is nothing on a national scale.
Right, that's basically pocket change for a country.
Exactly. It means the UK cannot spend its way out of this trap. Traditional economic growth is just walled off. This forces a really desperate pivot to the only sector currently defying macroeconomic gravity.
Which is the artificial intelligence race.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author makes a very sharp distinction between what we've seen so far and what's coming. We aren't just talking about generative AI anymore, the stuff that writes polite emails or makes funny images.
The parlor tricks.
Yeah, exactly. Generative AI is like having a really smart, incredibly fast encyclopedia on your desk. You ask it a question, it gives you a static answer. But the report zeroes in on agentic AI.
This is the real game changer.
Think of agentic AI like hiring a highly ambitious, relentless intern. You don't ask it a question, you give it an objective.
Because it possesses agency.
Right. It can independently plan, it can reason through obstacles, and it can actually execute multi-step financial transactions across different platforms on your behalf.
And for the UK, this is huge. The UK financial services sector is the world's second largest fintech hub behind the US. For them, agentic AI is the biggest structural mechanism for change since the Big Bang deregulation of 1986.
Yeah, wow, that's a massive comparison.
It's that significant. According to joint survey data from the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority, or the FCA, 75% of UK financial firms are already embedding AI into their architecture. In January 2026, the FCA actually launched the Mills Review to architect how this market will function by 2030.
And the government's vision here is wild. By 2030, they want everyday retail consumers to have AI agents acting as their own personal private bankers.
It democratizes high-end finance.
Yeah. So instead of, logging into an app to transfer money, your AI agent monitors the global currency markets, notices your mortgage rate is suboptimal, independently negotiates a better rate with a competing bank's AI via an API, and just executes the refinancing while you are asleep.
It's enterprise-grade portfolio management democratized for everyone.
But there's got to be friction there.
Oh, absolutely. The friction here is entirely regulatory. Think about it. How do you govern a million invisible interns executing millions of transactions a second?
That sounds like a compliance nightmare.
It is. The FCA wants a flexible, principles-based approach. They explicitly want to avoid writing rigid, AI-specific rules because the technology mutates every 3 months.
Right, a law written in March is obsolete by June.
Exactly. Instead, they want to use existing frameworks, essentially making human senior managers personally legally liable if their firm's AI agents engage in market manipulation or discrimination.
But the House of Commons Treasury Committee is tearing into that strategy, right?
Oh yeah, they hate it. Their January 2026 report argues that a wait-and-see, principles-based approach is totally reckless. They want comprehensive, hard-coded AI guidance and rigorous stress tests by the end of the year, arguing that without it, consumers are exposed to massive systemic harm.
And beyond the systemic financial risk, there is a pretty brutal distributional shadow hitting the labor market. The youth unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds was already at 15.3% in late 2025.
Right, and agentic AI accelerates that.
Because if an AI agent can reliably execute the multi-step, routine tasks, drafting the basic contracts, compiling the compliance reports, doing the foundational research, the demand for human juniors just vanishes. The bottom three rungs of the corporate ladder just disappear.
The report projects that in adverse scenarios, this structural displacement could drive youth unemployment to 17 or 18% by 2027.
That's a crisis level.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because if the entry-level roles that traditionally train the next generation of managers are automated away, the mechanism for creating future senior leaders breaks down entirely. You break the pipeline.
I want to push back on this whole AI utopia the government is banking on, though.
Sure.
The UK might be a massive fintech hub, but the report details how they are almost entirely dependent on a tiny handful of U.S. tech firms, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, for the actual physical servers, the foundational models, and the compute power.
Yeah, that's a huge blind spot.
So how can the UK safely rely on the United States to power its critical financial infrastructure when the source material paints a picture of a totally brutal, ongoing global trade war?
Well, that is the ultimate vulnerability of the special relationship. I mean, in May 2025, the UK and the US signed the Economic Prosperity Deal, the EPD.
Which sounded great on paper.
Right. It was a highly transactional piece of diplomacy with the Trump administration that capped tariffs on UK cars and eliminated tariffs on steel and aluminum.
So what broke? Why didn't it last?
The underlying legal mechanics of U.S. trade law broke.
Right.
In February 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the president's ability to use a specific statute called IEPA,
Which stands for
the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The court said you can't use it to unilaterally impose tariffs without a literal declared national emergency. That ruling essentially stripped the foundation out from under massive chunks of U.S. trade policy.
But the administration didn't just give up on tariffs, did they?
Far from it. Within days, they pivoted to a different, much older mechanism, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974.
Okay, so reaching back to the 70s.
Yeah. This is a balance of payments tool that gives the executive branch the authority to impose a blanket 15% global tariff for up to 150 days without congressional approval.
So the Supreme Court shuts down one avenue. The administration immediately uses a 1970s loophole to slap a 15% tariff on everyone. And the UK's sweet economic prosperity deal just goes up in smoke. They get caught right in the blast radius.
Exactly. It essentially nullified the EPD overnight. The report notes this makes the UK one of the worst affected advanced economies relative to its prior expectations.
Because they thought they were safe.
Right. It reveals the special relationship as structurally fragile. When British business leaders were surveyed in the aftermath, they overwhelmingly signaled a desire to pivot away from the U.S. and align closer with the European Union.
And the mechanism for that pivot is currently underway. The UK is negotiating a major SPS reset with the EU.
Right, the sanitary and phytosanitary standards.
Basically, the UK is trying to dynamically align its food and agricultural rules with Europe.
And the goal there is twofold. First, to recover the roughly £4 billion in agricultural exports lost since Brexit. Second, to remove the friction of the Windsor Framework.
Right. By aligning standards, you remove the need for veterinarians to physically inspect every single truck full of British sausages crossing the Irish Sea into Northern Ireland.
Exactly. It smooths out the trade borders. But they aren't just looking back to Europe. The UK formally joined the CPTPP.
The massive Indo-Pacific trade bloc.
Right, becoming its first European member.
Yeah.
They are scrambling to diversify their cellular towers, go back to your earlier analogy.
Bouncing the signal wherever they can.
Yeah. And we have to understand that this diversification isn't just about moving sausages and setting AI standards. It is about sheer physical survival.
The defense aspect.
Yes. The report heavily emphasizes Prime Minister Starmer's Strategic Defense Review from June 2025. It pushes for a massive structural increase in defense spending, targeting 2.5% of GDP by 2027, with ambitions for 3%. This is a complete pivot to what the military calls warfighting readiness.
Which means rebuilding munitions factories, a £15 billion investment in the nuclear arsenal.
Right.
And the justification for that spending isn't abstract at all. The report points to March 2026, when an Iranian drone struck a UK Royal Air Force base in Cyprus. Middle Eastern instability isn't just threatening shipping lanes anymore, it is physically detonating on British strategic outposts.
So look at the board we have set up here. We have a stagnant economy trapped by imported inflation, a disruptive AI frontier reliant on foreign servers, collapsing U.S. trade agreements, and direct military strikes on sovereign bases.
It's a lot.
It's overwhelming. Which brings us to the core thesis of Dr. Noven's report. How does this specific combination of variables actually play out by 2030?
And to figure that out, the author uses something called Bayesian game theoretic models to map the future.
Sounds complicated, but it's really elegant.
For you listening, Bayesian updating is essentially a mathematical framework that constantly recalculates probabilities as new information arrives. It's like a highly educated magic 8-ball that alters its predictions every time a world leader signs a bill or launches a drone.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks. Based on this math, the author lays out 3 distinct scenarios. Let's walk through the multiverse here.
Okay, scenario 1 is labeled the Harsanyi equilibrium, and it's assigned a 28% probability.
Pause there for a second. Who is Harsanyi and why is this an equilibrium?
Good question. John Harsanyi was a Nobel-winning economist who figured out how to mathematically model games with incomplete information.
Because in geopolitics, countries usually bluff, right? They hide their true red lines.
Exactly. A Harsanyi equilibrium happens when external shocks are so severe that the bluffing just has to stop. Everyone's true constraints are revealed, which forces them to cooperate.
Oh, okay.
So this Goldilocks scenario, the Gulf crisis is so destructive that it forces the West to coordinate. The U.S. lets the 15% Section 122 tariff lapse after its 150 days. The U.K. successfully secures its agricultural deal with the EU, and the SCA's flexible AI rules trigger a massive domestic productivity boom. In this world, the U.K. achieves a solid 1.8 to 1.9% sustained growth.
Okay, so 28% chance of a rational, cooperative world. What's the downside scenario?
Scenario 2 is signaling failure, and unfortunately, it carries the highest probability at 42%.
It's a nightmare path.
Yes, this is another path.
Yeah.
Actors misread each other's intentions. The U.S. Congress decides to legislate the 15% tariff into permanent law.
Oh.
The energy shock from the Middle East becomes prolonged. The Bank of England is trapped, keeping interest rates brutally high, suffocating domestic investment. Growth flatlines at around 1.1%. That structural youth unemployment we discussed spikes over 18%. And the City of London suffers massive capital outflows as firms relocate to more stable jurisdictions.
So a 42% chance of a prolonged structural nightmare. But there is a third path, right?
Yeah. Scenario 3 is the technological autonomy pivot, sitting at a 30% probability. This is where the UK aggressively leans into the Mills Review.
The AI regulation.
Right. While the US and the EU get bogged down in fragmented, highly restrictive AI regulations, London uses its principles-based legal system to become the undisputed global regulatory haven for agentic AI.
So they stop trying to compete on building the physical servers and instead compete on writing the code of conduct.
Precisely. They draw in global digital trade, triggering a radical productivity surge that slashes the administrative costs of their own public services and supercharges growth, completely, regardless of what the U.S. does with tariffs.
To really synthesize how the UK gets to that third scenario, I want to look at a brilliant architectural analogy the author uses at the very end of the text.
It really pulls it all together.
It does. For decades, the UK's grand strategy was to market itself as a bridge between the United States and Europe. But structurally speaking, a bridge is entirely passive. It just sits there. It relies entirely on the value and the traffic generated by the landmasses on either side.
Right.
Crucially, a bridge becomes totally useless if the shore on either side decides to pull away.
Which is exactly what we are watching happen in real time with U.S. tariff volatility and EU regulatory friction.
Exactly. The author argues the UK has to stop being a passive bridge and must become an active node. Think of a node in a computer network. A node generates its own intrinsic value. It processes information, it sets the standards for AI financial compliance, it innovates in defense technology.
It creates gravity.
Yes. A node creates so much unique value that other countries, regardless of their trade blocs, have no choice but to route their traffic through it.
That transition from bridge to node is the absolute bedrock of the report's final conceptual framework, which Dr. Noven calls networked sovereignty.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
It is the death of Atlanticist exceptionalism. The idea that you pledge exclusive romantic loyalty to a single superpower.
Putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Network sovereignty means deliberately cultivating a dense web of asymmetric relationships. It means relying on the CPTPP for Asian trade access, relying on the IUK's Pact for Indo-Pacific nuclear submarine defense, dynamically aligning with the EU on agricultural standards, and acting as the lone global clearinghouse for agentic AI.
You embed yourself into multiple overlapping networks so deeply that if one tower falls, like, say, a U.S. Supreme Court trade ruling, your connection doesn't drop.
You dynamically route around the failure.
Survival in 2026 and beyond requires technological foresight, an absolute refusal to rely on outdated alliances, and the sheer geopolitical imagination to build your own gravity. We've covered an immense amount of ground today, from the macro shocks of the Gulf crisis squeezing your tax bracket, to the granular reality of invisible AI interns, and finally to the grand strategy of a nation trying to secure its future in a multipolar world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
As you process all of these geostrategic mechanics, I really want to leave you with a final thought to apply to your own life. Look at your own career, your own skill set, or your own business. Are you currently operating like a bridge, entirely dependent on two other departments, or a single client, or a specific software platform for your value? Or are you operating like a node, generating your own indispensable active value that people simply have to route through? In an era defined by network sovereignty, being a passive bridge might just make you obsolete.
That is a deeply uncomfortable but entirely necessary question to ask yourself. Keep building your node, keep questioning the world around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.